Nice to meet you. I was telling your sister that I just came to see what kind of a place this is. So a lot of people want nothing to do with the RIC now, want rid of them. Hi, my name is Brendan Farrell. I'm one of the writers of Fractured. I'm also an actor, sound designer and filmmaker as well. So I've also been recording the podcast and editing, putting the sound design to it. So, oh, and I played Andrew Hughes as well. I think the most challenging role I ever played as an actor has been that of Billy in Eugene O'Brien's Eden. It's set in the Midlands in Edenderry, and it's about a very normal couple. There's nothing special about them. They were happily married once, but they lost their way. There's crises of confidence on both sides. And for Breda, she shrunk into herself. She lost social confidence. She lost everything that way. Billy lacked, I dare to say he's maybe not smart enough to fully realize. He doesn't, I don't think, have the emotional intelligence to process what's happening to him. And his character is kind of tragic, as both of them are. And he falls into all these kind of male bravado style compensation type tactics or whatever, including a lot of drinking. And it's kind of tragic. Without giving too much away, there's choices, and you can either overcome it, or you can move on and become stronger, or you can just fail, you know, and be a beautifully tragic failure. I think, yeah, Billy was a real challenge because apart from being effectively monologues, the balance between his inner thoughts and his outer, what he says, flick, and they kind of, you know, he dances this little knife edge of whether he's telling the truth or whether he's not. Because he's not directly talking to the audience. At times it feels like he is, but it's more like an inner monologue where he's convincing himself. And those little dances, those little turns were challenging, but brilliant to explore. And it was a real, yeah, I mean, it was very emotionally resonant once you get into that. Like anything else with acting, when you empathize with a character, suddenly you feel, oh my God, you know, you feel so sorry for people, or you feel empowered for them and you want to defend them, all those type of things. So yeah, I think that was the most challenging role. We have I suppose, the benefit of hindsight now, looking back at what has happened since the War of Independence and the Civil War that followed. Dev survived it. And in surviving it, he shaped the history. He shaped, you know, the story of what happened. Personally, it's hard to know. I mean, you know, when you kind of look back on this time, and I would always say, well, I admire Collins for the pragmatism of following a diplomatic path after having done, you know, a guerrilla tactics, an armed struggle. He then followed a diplomatic path, and he got the best he could get. And he compromised, and he actually moved on from that. Dev decided not to do that. The reasons, I'm not quite sure. He was never a man for an armed struggle. He always seemed to kind of, you know, supposedly be kind of there, but avoided all the conflict. You know, yeah, I think Dev is a much more slippery character. Always has been. He looked after himself. He was Sinn Féin, he was also May Féin. Collins was more, I think he started off as a firebrand, a young, fiery character. Like a lot of young people at the time, he went into the armed struggle thinking that was the best thing. then he moved on to a diplomatic kind of solution. So I feel if he had survived, I would probably be more Collins. It's an interesting comparison because they're very different things. For example, there's actually been the NT Live, which has been theatre pieces which have been then shown in a cinema. So you can see what it was like to be or feel what it was like to be in the theatre. But that only works if you go to the cinema. It doesn't work at home. It's not the same thing. And I think that kind of helps in trying to bridge that gap. It actually shows the difference between them. Theatre is a communal experience. It's what you feel from experiencing this, reality happening in front of you. And you get to experience that communally with other people. Your emotions are shared. Everybody's breath and breathing tends to synchronize. You get those gasps of, oh my God, what just happened? A rise of anger, a rise of emotion, a rise of everything. That you get in theatre, which is magic. And is a thing that only can, I won't say only can happen in theatre, but it does feel like the Greeks had the chorus. It does feel a bit more communal. And I think that actually really makes for something special. Film, I love as well, because film is different. Film, yes, it's more realistic most times, as in you're in the real places. You get that sense of being there with people. But the extra thing, it allows you get closer to the eyes, you get closer into the soul, you kind of see a bit more. That's why, there's a bridge between theatre and film acting. A lot of good theatre people can go into film and they can temper the amount of which they show to suit film acting. Film acting to theatre tends not to work so well because film acting is smaller. The truth has to happen inside here, but it just stays very much internal. It comes out through the eyes and we get to see that. And that's the truth that we see. We can get that in theatre as well if we're up close and personal. At a distance, you are relying on more great technique to actually show these things through the body and stuff like that. So I love both of them. Don't get me wrong. I'm not choosing one or the other. They both, I think, are amazing. I think one of the most interesting things about the time period in Fractured is that this is the early stages of a new Ireland, or a brand new Ireland, I suppose. We'd never experienced being on our own. The training wheels were off, you know what I mean? We were basically, okay, here we go. This is us. This period that we're exploring is the War of Independence. So this is about us gaining our freedom. But in it as well, you start to see the conflicts that will end up being the Civil War, the conflicts and the challenges that we're still exploring today. While there's not necessarily, we haven't leaned too heavily on the influence of the church at the time as it went on with the Civil War and then De Valera and, Archbishop McQuaid and, the Catholic Church really imposing, becoming the new, the new England, if you know what I mean, the one who would tell us what to do. You still see the challenges of where people were kind of challenging the church a bit at the time and the beliefs and faiths and being dictated to. So this parallel is still happening today. There's also, we're in this very, the world is in a big flux at the moment. The rise of the right again, the rise of nationalism. So you got Brexit in the UK, you had, thank God, Trump in the US. But the struggles are still there. The difficulties are still there. We got Orban in Hungary. There's Poland is a similar. Russia's gone backwards as well. China's clamping down. All these things around the world and the Taliban, of course, in Afghanistan. Things are becoming very fractured. And the EU is actually struggling to be a cohesive whole. So I think, you know, in terms of trying to find out what do we want, I think the struggles that people had back then are just as relevant today as they were then. It's different in the sense of that was about, you know, throwing the shackles off an oppressor, you know, that where England had been, you know, de facto the ruler of Ireland for 800 years. So, sorry, I'm slightly off. I'm going to say 700 years at that point. So, yeah, I mean, there's the struggles that people have are the struggles people will always have, the human struggles. And that's no different then to now. So we tend to forget in the bigger picture of history, we tend to look at the big events and the big things that happened. And then there was this, and there was the Easter Rising, and then there was, you know, the bombing of the Four Courts, and there was all this, these major events that happened. The thing is, behind it all were real people with simple lives who were trying to get food, trying to get housing, trying to get a job, struggling within families and all the little, you know, the politics of families and the politics of their friends. And that's the same now. So when we look at people back then, I mean, whenever we look at events, always think that there's, you know, you have to be reminded of the fact that these are real people behind it, and real people are real people no matter what era it is.